area that we work.
Spinal.
There are periosteal stem cells. They're undifferentiated stem cells within the periosteum, which, if triggered, can become osteogenic cells. So how many of you use membranes in your practice? Raise your hand. It should be virtually everybody here. Right? So why are you using a membrane? What is it accomplish?
Stabilization of the graft.
Stabilization.
Prevent
Prevent invasion of the soft tissue into the grafted area, right? And it does exactly what it's intended to do. However, one of the drawbacks of using a membrane, especially the longer resorbing ones, is you get no contribution from the periosteal side. So all of your bone growth now has to occur from bone. You have a very, very large grafted area, you better leave enough time for that bone to grow, because all that bone now has to grow from bone. If you have a one wall defect, and you have 5 or 6 or 7 millimeters of graft material, it's going to take 6, 7, 8, 9 months for that bone to grow across. However, if you get a contribution from the periosteal side, bone is growing from both sides and meeting somewhere in the middle. So now I'm going to show you some of our results using different types of membranes, including PRF membranes, that now stimulate bone growth from the periosteal side instead. Ensure the quality of bone that we get in those cases. We'll do that tomorrow. Next paper. Cytosolic free calcium dependent regulation of osteoclastic bone resorption. Cytosolic calcium, free ionic calcium, from wherever it comes, is one of the messengers in the pathway that inhibits bone resorption. That's odd. What is the calcium doing then? All of our bone in our body is resorbed every 140 to 150 days on a microscopic level. We call them cutting cones. Little osteoclasts come through the bone, they eat away the bone, and as they eat away the bone, cell-mediated resorption, what do they leave behind? 2 things. The release of BMP that was stored in the bone, and free ionic calcium, because the acidity produced by the osteoclast is breaking down the HA and releasing free ionic calcium. And what's right behind the osteoclast? The osteoblast. The osteoblast is now being stimulated by the BMP and the free ionic calcium to now produce new bone. By the way, does an osteoclast produce bone? Yes or no? No. What does it produce?
Enzymes that eating.
Produces collagen. Type 3 collagen, which then gets converted to type 1 collagen. It's the collagen that undergoes a precipitation reaction outside of the cell, which then becomes bone. Osteoclasts do not secrete bone. That's the biggest fallacy in the world. Osteoblasts secrete, manufacture collagen, which then outside the cell becomes bone. A clinically relevant model of osteoinduction, process requiring calcium phosphate. Ectopic bone formation, material growing outside of bone, was found next to calcium phosphate granules, suggesting that calcium phosphate may have triggered the osteoinductive program, the release of free ionic calcium. Next paper, osteoinduction with highly purified beta TCP, dog dorsal muscle. Again, without the use of bone marrow cells or osteoinductive growth factors, osteoinductivity in muscle with calcium phosphate. Next one, from stem cells development, focusing on gene expression as a basis of stem cell differentiation. Osteogenic differentiation, meaning the undifferentiated stem cell becomes a bone-producing cell, an osteogenic cell, in the presence of free ionic calcium. This is what we want. We want the cell to reach the surface of material and immediately spread out over that material, because that cell is being stimulated by the release of calcium. That does not occur with biomass. That's why they become fibrous encapsulated. Now this is, to me, when I saw this orthopedic study, this was amazing to me. Because in this study, and they impregnated the cells with radioactive thymidine. That's it's called 3H thymidine. And they looked at the human osteoblast culture, the MG63 line. Anyone here ever do bone cell research? Well, there's a classic cell, it's called the MG63 cell. And I'm using it again. In fact, I'm doing some research at the University of Vienna on a new treatment for peri-implantitis using a different wavelength. And I will actually present that research for you today, at the end of today, show you what we're doing with new lasers. Rat and osteoblast cell cultures. And what they found was, in the absence of calcium, the white column represents how many osteoblasts are present. But in the presence of the right amount of phreonic calcium, this is how many osteoblasts are present. You can actually upregulate the formation of osteoclasts up to 500% if you have the right chemistry of phreonic calcium. And that's going to come later on when we talk about some other cases. We'll show you why that's important. In every case, when calcium is present in the right amounts, not too little, not too much, we can get to a 500% increase in the numbers of osteoblasts. Where do these osteoblasts come from? Some of them come from bone, some of them come from the medullary circulation that brings in cells, and the rest of it comes from the periosteum, the undifferentiated stem cells in the periosteum. This is called electrophoresis. In electrophoresis, we're actually able to take that radioactive thymidine and then test how much mitochondrial proteins are being manufactured by the mitochondria. And what they did in this case is they took two solutions. One was a 1 millimole solution, the other one was a 5 millimole solution of pure calcium ions. They put it into a cell culture and tested it at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 60 minutes, 2, 6, 24, and 48 hours. What is amazing to me is that within 5 minutes,
Like,
you get a 500% increase in the production of early proteins from those mitochondria. 5 minutes in the presence of this right amount of calcium. They're called MAP kinases, mitogen activated proteins. And that's how sensitive our testing instruments are, that we can detect that kind of change within a cell after only 5 minutes. That is powerful stuff. And if we know that, we can start to use that to our advantage in our surgical sites. This is one of the few human clinical studies you will ever see on why calcium phosphate materials are so important, the release of phreonic calcium. This was done by a good friend of mine, Rationale, who's the editor-in-chief of the European Academy of Osteointegration Journal, great researcher in Italy, and his whole group over there. What they did was they did full mouth implants on a number of patients with the provision that after 2 months, 2 of the implants were going to be explanted and histologically examined. And this is the 2 implants were identical in architecture. One was acid etched, the other one though was acid etched plus had a calcium phosphate coating on the outside. 1 micron, even less than 1 micron, just a little bit of calcium phosphate in the titanium oxide layer. When they did the histomorphometry in this case, this is the amount of bone that you see going around the acid etched implant. Average amount of bone implant contact. No real bone remodeling after 2 months. You can see this with any implant in the world. Any implant that you use will look exactly like this. But within the same patient, on the contralateral side, The second implant was removed, and this is what we found. Look at the amount of bone to implant contact, look at the density, look at the mineralization, look at the amount of bone turning over in the same amount of time, within the same patient. We show them side to side, this is what they look like. That's the bone level, so we've actually maintained bone at crest, and look at the difference in density between the calcium phosphate surface and the non-calcium phosphate surface within the same patient. That's powerful stuff. And then we can go even further. We can do micro DNA analyses of these. We can look at all of the pathways involved in bone growth. This was a study that was published by my good friend Paulo Coelho at New York University Department of Biomaterials and Biomimetics in New York. And to get a paper published in Journal Bone, you're in. This is the #1 journal for bone research in the world, the highest impact factor. And this was an amazing study for me because it vindicated all of us who for the past 10 years were talking about the importance of calcium releasing materials. Here it is. And they tested 6 different pathways. COL1, Runex, Osterix, osteopon, osteocalcin, and alkaline phosphatase. In every single pathway, when calcium was present, which is represented by this black column, there's an upregulation of the metabolism of bone cells in every pathway. That is key for this, because this is the first message that we got saying, your research for 10 years, you've just proved it to be true. Why is calcium so important? In the beginning, I mean, literally within seconds of being placed, not even 5 minutes, seconds of being placed. And we will study this tomorrow. We actually cover leukocyte-containing fibrin-rich fiber. And we talk about the conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin in a clot, which is the first thing that occurs in a surgical site. Put an implant in, and a clot forms around the implant. Why is calcium so important? There are 3 things that are involved in the clotting process. First, thrombin. Second is clotting factors, in this case, something like 13A. The last one, free calcium. So when calcium is present, I'm going to show you the quality of the fibrin clot that we get, literally within seconds. That's why when we do an extraction, we need implant placement today. I'm using hopefully an implant that has calcium phosphate on the surface. Now I'm not using bone graft materials in these thin little gaps between my bone and my implant. I'm actually using autologous fiber, and this is a perfect example of placing a fiber in that gap. And I presented a year ago at the American Academy of Implant Dentistry, AID meeting in I don't remember what city it was, San Diego, I think it was, where we showed the quality of the bone that we get when we do this. In fact, here's the actual x-ray of this. This was extraction media implant placement. When we have a calcium-releasing implant surface, and we use growth factors, we look at it in a 3D analysis, look at the density of the bone in the gap area. Not the density of the bone that was native, that already existed, which was pretty good because it's native bone, not a grafted site. Look at the quality of the bone that we're getting here when calcium is being released in the presence of autologous fibrins and live cells. And tomorrow when we cover the PRF section, we're going to show you why you should be using autologous biologics in your surgical sites, whether you're mixing it with your bone graft material or you're combining it with your implant placement, why it's essential that you do that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
When you place those implants, the space that is allowed to push into PRF is very little, so it may just be...
If it's a smaller gap, I use this alone. If it's a larger gap, I'm concerned because that PRF is going to resorb within 7 to 14 days. And if there's still a space there, epithelial cells will grow down. then I will use the bone graft material. But it doesn't give me the right to be stupid about what bone graft material I'm going to be using. I use a calcium releasing bone graft material that is cell occlusive and yet has the same effect it would be if it was just autologous fibrin mold. I'm going to show you that. So what is the ideal calcium releasing biomaterial for grafting purposes? Any non-ceramic calcium phosphates. I don't care what you use. I have my own favorite ones. They're available all over the world. And a lot of them are alloplast, they're synthetic materials. No problems with disease transmission, no one should argue about the efficacy, but when they're highly resorbable, they're hydrophilic, which is important. They're replaced by autogenous bone at a rapid rate. It resorbs at the same rate as autogenous bone is being laid down. You have the release of freonic calcium, which makes it, by definition now, anything that's calcium releasing is an osteoinductive material. You get a high percentage of vital bone. In fact, in some of our cases, we're getting up to we've done a histology course, up to 75% vital bone. You know, much higher stress-bearing modulus from increased density. No foreign body reaction, is just like natural material from the body, and you get regeneration, not repair. That should be a part of your lexicon today. It should be something to think about now every day for the rest of your practices. You want it replaced with good, healthy host bone, or just repairing the defect. It doesn't matter to me if you're doing in an area where you're not placing implants, you want to maintain your ridge form, use a non-resorbable, a high crystalline HA. I don't care. We want to maintain that ridge volume underneath pontics. For the area where you're going to be placing implants, you don't want repair, you want regeneration. So I like to call these things composite grafts. Anytime you mix two or more materials together, by definition, it's a composite graft. We're using bottled bone, allograft. Allograft, as it comes out, is a graft material. What you add to it makes it a composite graft. Now here's one of my earlier cases. This is a failed implant. I'm gonna go ahead and debride this. I don't care how you debride it. I love lasers. Then what happened was I started to add fibrin, plasma, to my graft material. This is before the famous name sticky bone came out. We were doing this 10 years ago. We didn't know what it was. We didn't have a name for it. It just looked good and handled beautifully. This is a particulate material with fibrin, which made it sticky, made it so it's not pieces. And then I used to cover these, not knowing back then, I didn't need a membrane back then, but we were covering with membranes in the beginning. We were afraid. That's not true anymore, because it's a membrane within itself. It's a plasmatic membrane, just like a PRF membrane. And then we close this and end up with beautiful results. And one day, a researcher, a PhD researcher from one of the big bone graft companies saw this video. He said, Robert, man, you're working too hard. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you're mixing all these things together. I've got a material that all you need to do is take plasma, put it into your graft material, and there it is, your composite bone graft. And I said, show me. And this is what they came up with. They were actually, and all of you have seen what looks like this. You've seen collagen plugs. You can get anywhere, right? The problem with collagen alone is it resorbs kind of quickly, right? You don't want to use it by itself. If you were to infuse a collagen plug, however, with plasma and allowed it to set into a plasmatic membrane, you have incredible graft material. Even better, if you add a bone graft within this collagen plug and you add that, it's even better than that. I'm going to show you my clinical outcomes from this. So what is a rationale for what we call the current first break is
still have 30 minutes.
Okay, good. First rationale for composite grafts. Number one, it should be a collagen substrate. All of your bone graft materials should contain collagen. How many of you use demineralized freeze-dried bone? Raise your hands. Why do you use demineralized freeze-dried bone? What is it preserving? Collagen. You're demineralizing but leaving the collagen. So that's why people are moving more towards DFDB than FDB, because they want collagen in there. So if we remember that osteoblasts are secreting collagen, collagen then undergoes a precipitation reaction to produce bone, then all of our bone graft materials should contain collagen. Second, for me, it should have an embedded graft material if possible. You can make these yourself if you want to, but if you're going to buy one that has the graft material, and Geistlich makes one, it's a biomass related material. Implant makes one with osteogen. There's a few companies that are manufacturing right now. In fact, every day there's more and more people doing it because they see these lectures and they understand the importance of having these great composite grafts. So you should have one that has an embedded graft material, because it acts as a collagen membrane by allowing the placement of bone graft and maintaining a space. So all the things that you were doing with all of these things put together come in one product now. It acts as a barrier to epithelial invasion, and it prevents migration of the particulate. One of the reasons why we use a collagen membrane over particulate is we prevent extravasation, we prevent loss of bone graft, we prevent salivary contamination, and we prevent fibroblast invasion of the graft material. All of this in one product if you simply infuse with autologous plasma. So if we talk about the techniques for optimal healing, it maintains your volume while the graft resorbs. Well, that's one of the reasons why we use membranes. We want to maintain our volume. We get a contribution of both the graft and the collagen, because the precipitation reaction forms on the collagen strands that are already within the graft material. And then you get a contribution of the freonic calcium that's being released from the graft material. It's porous, allows blood and blood vessels to grow into it. It's hydrophilic. As soon as fluid comes in contact, it just draws it right in. And it can be used also if you want to add other things to it. If you want to add recombinant human platelet-derived growth factor, recombinant human bone morphogenic protein, or platelet-rich plasma, or leukocyte-containing platelet-rich fibrin, which is what I use today. This is the form that I use and that I want you to be using. It's the easiest to obtain, it's the easiest to use, the best clinical outcome. So we look at the histology with the electron microscope of these new composite grafts that you can get. The composite grafts are collagen, which is this, with embedded graft material. And then what happens is, as you're compressing them into the site, the density of the graft materials is getting greater because you're pushing the material together. So it's made of bone, 60 to 40% mineral to collagen ratio. The composite grafts mimic that, and when plugs are condensed, the ratio to mineral gets greater because you're compacting the material. Now, let's talk a little bit about hydration of graft materials. How many of you have ever hydrated a graft material, say, with sterile anesthetic solution? You know, you got some material lying around, you need to wet it to carry it. How many of you have ever used a little bit of anesthetic solution to carry to it? Nobody? Ever used anesthetic? What's the full name of lidocaine?
Something calcium.
Lidocaine is lidocaine hydrochloride, which makes it a what? It's an acid. The acid, the acidity, the pH of anesthetic solutions is 3.3 to 5. Remember before I said as soon as you drop from 7.4 to 7.1 in pH, completely shut down osteoblast growth? So when you add an acidic anesthetic solution, you're delaying your bone growth immediately. How many of you hydrate your bone grafts with saline? Raise your hands. Almost everybody here, come on, of course you do. Sterile setting. And you do so because it's sterile, you do so because it hydrates, it's easy to carry your bone graft material to the surgical site. But other than that, there's no contribution of the saline to growth at all. It's okay, no harm, but no benefit. Now, for some bone graft materials, they tell you, do not hydrate this graft material with saline, especially if you're using TCP, too quick a resorption and release of calcium. They tell you only hydrate with whole blood, because it's physiologic neutral. It's 7.4, contains cells, contains already released growth factors, but whole blood also contains red blood cells. And when red blood cells break down, what happens? Two things. It becomes acidic, and it becomes cytotoxic. There's the reason for that. Imagine you have a wound, and you get you put something over the wound, and it bleeds in, it becomes a fibroid clot. You don't get an infection in those, do you? Why? Because the pH goes down, it becomes acidic. Bacteria and viruses and fungi don't grow in an acidic environment. So it's an adaptive thing for us to have red blood cells. But it also delays bone growth because it's acidic and it's cytotoxic. Next up from there is autologous serum. How many of you use PRF in your practices currently?
On and on.
3 people? We're gonna have some fun tomorrow. Because by the end of tomorrow, all of you will be using it. It's incredibly effective because it's pH 7.4, which is physiologic neutral. That's what you want. From the moment you put a material inside your surgical site, you want to be physiologic neutral. Exceedingly important. And it also contains some growth factors that are already released into the bloodstream. Within our blood are circulating BMPs and everything else, every other growth factor. But they're present in small amounts. The problem with circulating growth factors is that they have a relatively short half-life. Who can tell me what the half-life is of platelet-derived growth factor, which is great for fibroblast growth? Take a guess.
5 days.
5 days? Anybody else? Half-life of PDGF. Ready for this? 2 to 4 minutes. Which means at the end of 10 minutes, all the PDGF that's been released from blood is metabolized, it's gone. Who can tell me what the half-life is of BMP? It's 24 hours, which means at the end of 48 hours, 2 days, all the BMP that's been released is metabolized, it's gone. So what good is it to use, while it's great to have a material that's pH neutral, 7.4, by the end of 2 days, all the growth factors that are released into that serum are gone, it's metabolized. When does bone growth begin? 7 to 14 days. All the BMPs that you put into from the serum into your graft material, they're gone. It's not helpful. But it's good. It's if nothing else, it's great. So this is the serum that we've collected after squeezing out all the fiber, and we'll demonstrate this tomorrow. We're going to hydrate our graft materials. The great thing about this is that it's not that it makes sticky bone, but it makes the particulate sticky, which means that when you pick it up with your instrument and you carry it, it doesn't fall off your instrument, which happens when you use saline. And the reason it doesn't is because it contains 3 tissue adhesive proteins: thrombospondin, vitronectin, and fibronectin, which are adhesive proteins.
So, excuse me.
Yes.
You said that it was a hydrated graft, and the graft before you added the.
It wasn't hydrated, it was just particulate.
Right.
Not all. Let me go back here. You see, in in the damper dish is just particulates, it's dry. Now we're adding the serum from the serum box. Okay? The last thing that you can use is something called autologous plasma. Why is autologous plasma different from autologous serum? Autologous serum represents the fluid that's placed, the fluid that's released, without cells. It's just the fluid, just the fluid content of our bloodstream. It's water and a few little proteins. Autologous plasma, however, has live cells to it. Every kind of cell, except for red blood cells, we eliminate it. It has platelets. It has leukocytes, every kind of leukocyte, including leukocytes that release growth factors. And those growth factors are then released into the surgical site for 7 to 14 days, which exactly coincides with bone growth. pH neutral, 7.4, live cells, and when it comes in contact with the undifferentiated periosteal stem cells, it causes those stem cells to become osteogenic cells. So instead of having bone growth just from bone, now you're getting three-dimensional bone growth from both sides. And when you see our clinical results when we do that, you're going to be amazed at this. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to spin down a tube for only 3 minutes with no clot activator. It means that this yellow portion is still fluid. We'll demonstrate this tomorrow. Hope we'll demonstrate it. And we have got some bone graft materials that I brought with me from the States that we'll be able to play with. We're going to draw off the fluid. No red though. The needle is not down this red zone. It's only within this zone, the yellow zone. Very simple procedure. 3 minutes spin. Take it out, draw off the yellow fluid portion, and then use that fluid portion to hydrate the graft materials. All the live cells. That's plasma, not serum. Serum is clear, comes from the bottom of the box. This is plasma, it's still a yellow portion before it coagulates.
And the revolution, it's 1 to 1,200. For 3 minutes, the revolution.
It depends on the machine. It's not pure, it's not RPM, it's about G-force, and I'll explain that tomorrow in detail why that's so important. It's system dependent. And when I say I spin my intraspin system at 2,700 RPM for 3 minutes or 12 minutes or 18, depending on what I'm doing, it's not about RPM, it's about the G-force. The G-force on that is 408 Gs. That same RPM on a different machine might be 700 Gs. It might be 200 Gs for the same RPM. It's dependent on the particular type of centrifuge that you're using. And there's a formula that I can give you that can actually help you determine what the ideal speed is. But I'm just going to go on with this. Why is it so important?
Question.
Yes.
First, we saw the video that you have picked the serum, the
Yes.
other material only.
That's just from the bottom of the collection box.
Yeah, then you put something with the blood.
And this is from the tube before it coagulates into a clot, and when you express out just the clear fluid. I'm going to I'll show you this again and again. Don't worry. We're going to cover this tomorrow. A half day of nothing but how you do this. So, but I want to show you. I want to show you why we've moved from sterile anesthetic solution to saline, to whole blood, now to autologous serum, and finally to autologous plasma. And it's so easy to do. You just take a couple of tubes of blood, you spin it for 3 minutes, draw off the yellow thing, hydrate your stuff. Doesn't get any better than that. But your clinical outcomes are what is important. So when we add growth factors to alloplastic materials or allograft materials, I don't care what it is, it upregulates vasculogenesis. How does it do that? Why would these materials upregulate the development of a new rudimentary blood supply? Very simple. There's one particular growth factor. It's called vascular endothelial growth factor. You've probably heard the expression VEGF. VEGF is in white blood cells. That's the main reservoir of vascular endothelial growth factor. That's why we want the white blood cells. PRP contains no white blood cells. PRGF and Muerto Initra from Spain, no white blood cells. Only PRF contains white blood cells. And more drugs. Contains growth factors that will reduce early inflammatory cascade. Now notice I did not say eliminate. I said reduce the early inflammatory cascade. First, let me ask you this question. Is inflammation good or bad wound healing? It's good. Why? What does inflammation do? What is a direct effect of inflammation in the site?
Healing factors.
It dilates blood vessels, makes them more permeable. So not only does more blood reach the surgical site, all of the cells, all the regenerative cells come out. They leak out of those blood vessels that are enlarged. That's the whole reason for having inflammation. We're not talking about inflammation where your face swells out to here. That's edema. That's not inflammation. People think that's inflammation. It's not. They're chemotactic, meaning attractive. They attract cells to the site. Chemotaxis is extremely important because it attracts the earliest cells that are responsible for cleaning up a wound and for repairing a wound. The first cell that reaches a surgical site is the monocyte. And for the periodontist here, what does the monocyte become in tissue? It becomes a tissue macrophage. The monocyte only lives for a few days. When it gets into tissue, it can survive for a year to 2 years. And that's what helps keep tissue healthy. That's what phagocytizes a lot of the damaged tissue and bacteria. So by having something that's attracting monocytes, your wound heals faster. But it's important for one other reason. The monocyte is the body's first producer of BMP. So if you're attracting a lot more monocytes that would normally be present, now you have a lot more cells that are producing BMP that are responsible for early bone growth. That's a good part of our paradigm. That's what we want. So by having live cells in the surgical site that survive 7 to 14 days, exactly when bone growth is beginning, and you've concentrated them by 5 to 10 times by spinning blood, now it's no mystery why our bone growth results are far better when we're using autologous biologics and mixing with a good calcium-releasing bone graft material. And we add platelets and leukocytes for time release of critical growth factors in the early time of bone growth. This is an example of composite graft. This is a collagen matrix into which we have an embedded bone graft material. That red is not red blood cells. That bright red are the platelets. If it was red blood cells, it would be very dark in color. That light tinge is all the platelets. 3-minute spin, taking our composite graft material. And now we wait approximately 15-20 minutes. All it forms something called a plasmatic membrane. That's what it looks like after about 20 minutes. And now what you have essentially is you have a PRF membrane embedded within your composite graft material. Collagen-based, calcium-releasing graft material, live cells, and PRF membrane all built into one. That's one of the companies that manufacture. It comes in all different forms, but now I'm going to show you how we use this. This is, for example, an extraction of a tooth. How much I can show you the videos of these. We debride it completely. We decorticate, make sure there's good bleeding points in there. we'll take one of these collagen plugs, we'll put it down inside there, compress it down to slightly below the tissue level, do a nice suture over the top of it. Now here's the actual video of that case. I've just extracted the tooth. There's still a lot of granulomatous tissue.